Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for your patience. Talk about symptomatic of this year of the COVID. The COVID is actually what I refer to it as. And when internet goes down across the country, as you're trying to launch an inaugural event in honor of girls. But it's kind of just the way this year is going. But as someone said, I'm sure famous, the show must go on. And so I am delighted to be here as your host this evening. My name is Jan Damery, and I'm Vice President, External Relations and Engagement with YW Calgary. And this is our first, which is going to be memorable, inaugural Day of the Girl in celebration of International Day of the Girl that's going to be happening on Sunday. And we have an incredibly awesome program planned for you today, because as we're going to learn this evening in this interactive session, hosted in YW Calgary's Community Kitchen. So it's very much about us bringing community together, but we're going to learn that many of us are incredibly concerned about our girls and those who identify as girls in the face of the pandemic, stage of their life, and how important it is for all of us as adults, parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents to be supporting them as they struggle with the anxiety that this time brings. And so the way this program is going to work today is, as you know, because I know many of you have bought ingredients, we have the amazing Julie Van Rosendahl with us, who's going to actually do a demo in our community kitchen, which, by the way, is empowered by Enbridge. So I want to put a call out to there for them. And we're going to learn, I believe it's actually butter tarts, which I don't think Julie knows is my absolute favorite. So I'm excited about that, in addition to an apple galette. And then we're also going to have the pleasure of listening and having a conversation with Dr. Rochelle Papurni, as well as Lana Bentley, YW's own Lana Bentley, to talk about how do we help our young girls and those who identify as girls cope with these incredibly uncertain times, standing up for the Day of the Girl. Because we also know that our girls don't have the same experiences, particularly if they are Black or Indigenous or people of color. So this is where we get into the whole topic of intersectionality and the biases and the barriers that they face. And I think we can all agree that we want a community that is resilient and that there is opportunity for everyone. And that's certainly the belief and desire of YW Calgary. But before we start, I want to acknowledge that we are standing on some pretty sacred land, very close to where two great rivers come together. And so I want to do a land acknowledgement to really honor the ancestors that have come before us, and really those ancestors whose shoulders we stand upon. And so we gather today, virtually and in person, close to the merging of these two great rivers on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and peoples of Treaty 7, including Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nation. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region Number 3. So why don't we bring in our amazing Julie Van Rosendahl, and as she saunters over into the limelight, I'm just so choked and excited to have you here, Julie.
You're choked? Oh, that's
I'm choked,
great.
like I'm just verklempt that you're here, because I'm a huge admirer of yours. I also want to make sure that we're keeping our distance, so we're being very, very cautious. We have very few people in the room with us. But this is also, we're trying something new as in terms of how we bring people together into our kitchen.
Exactly.
And I know it's not your first time cooking in this kitchen.
No, this is the greatest kitchen. I just live a few blocks away, and we've done some events here before. It's perfect for this sort of, having a virtual audience at home. And it's great that everyone is in their homes, in their own kitchens, with the people that they love. It's such a great way to do it. So we just unmasked everyone. All the crew is masked. So we're going to keep a distance while we cook. But yeah, it's something I've done actually a lot through the pandemic, is cooking with people in their kitchens.
Well, and how just healing that is, right? And so getting back almost to the basics and what binds us together.
Exactly.
'Cause I channel, so you're going to be making butter tarts today.
Butter tarts.
I channel my grandmother, my nana.
Same, my grandma as well. We should have.
But before we get started, can you help me also thank our sponsors?
Yes.
Because I want to acknowledge our presenting sponsor, BrokerLink, Insurance, TD Bank, Royal LePage Benchmark, and NMAX. And this is a first-time gig for us. And so I'm absolutely thrilled that they are joining us on this journey.
Awesome. Thank
so we
you.
want to thank them because this would not be possible without them.
TD is my bank.
Well, see,
It's my actual
there
bank.
you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Anyway, I'm going to kind of throw over to you. I am just naturally curious, so we'll maybe just have a bit of a conversation while you get started.
Well, and I want to hear about your Nana's butter tarts, because this is my grandmother's butter tart recipe. So we're going to make two different pastry items, a galette, which is like a free-form pie, and butter tarts. And before we get into the whole raisin versus no raisin versus currants, which is my personal favorite, you can do whatever you like because you're at home. And so, raisins or no raisins. Okay, so we're gonna make pastry first. And this is something that I teach a lot in my classes because pastry is intimidating to a lot of people. And they fear the pastry, and the pastry smells fear. This is the #1 rule of pastry. You have to be the master of your pastry. Don't let it know that you're afraid. This is my grandmother's pastry recipe. And I'm just gonna make enough for a single batch of butter tarts, a dozen butter tarts, or a single galette. So if you look at pastry recipes, do you make pastry a lot, Jan?
I used to, and it's something that I'm sadly admitting, tender flake. Right?
So yes, my grandmother's no-fail pastry is the same as the one on the tender flake box. And that's okay, because most pastries have a similar formula. It's just flour, salt, some fat. I like an all butter pastry, but you could use lard, you could use shortening. Sometimes there's some eggs, sometimes there's some vinegar in there. So people are baking along, hey? If you have questions, we have people standing by.
We do.
To answer questions, to ask us questions so we can answer your questions. But if you're new to baking pastry, and if you're sort of new to baking in general, one thing that you should know about measuring your flour, this is perhaps the tiniest bag of flour that I have ever used.
You didn't even get the cup in there.
This is a half a cup measure. I could barely get in there. My flour at home is a ginormous bin. One thing to remember when you're measuring your flour is to sort of stir it up before you scoop it out. Because if it's packed down, you could be adding like a 1/4 cup of flour per cup that you're scooping out of the bin. So you could be adding more than you think, which is why a lot of recipes call for flour by weight. But not everyone has a scale.
Well, and what about that old-fashioned gadget where you used to sift? So I remember doing that actually for my grandmother.
Totally. I have my grandmother's sifter.
Yeah.
I'm also perhaps the messiest cook. So I just ignore the flour.
So do you have cleaners that come
everywhere?
In
No.
Or is that my job?
No, that's my husband. Yeah. My cleaner's name is Mike. So all-purpose flour is totally fine. You don't need cake and pastry flour, which has got a lower gluten content. A little bit of salt, only if you want your pastry to taste good. Otherwise, don't worry about it. That was a joke. So for the fat, you could use lard, you could use shortening. I like using butter because butter has, I think, the best flavor. And it also creates a lot of flaky layers because butter has some moisture in it, unlike lard and shortening, which are more solid fat. And that moisture sort of evaporates and creates these little flaky pockets in the pastry. So if I'm gonna choose one, I'll just do butter. If I want to use some lard, I usually use half lard, half butter, or half shortening, half butter. If you want to do a vegetarian or vegan pastry, shortening is vegetable based, so you can use shortening. And you may have noticed I made a little mark of the half cup. So butter packages have a cup, half cup measures marked on the side.
It's so awesome.
And a lot of, especially kids don't realize that. It's a super easy way to measure your butter. This was cold before we had our technical difficulties. It's a little bit soft, but that's actually okay because if it's not ice cold, it's easier to work into your flour. So if you want to mark off the butter on the side and then grate it with the coarse side of a box grater.
That's a trick.
You can do that. That's one way to get your butter in there.
Or better cold.
A little bit better cold, yeah.
Yeah.
And the way I like to do it is the way my grandmother did it, which was with an old paring knife. See, I get food everywhere. She would slice the butter in chunks into the flour, which is what I like to do because it makes me think of her. It just reminds me of
Well, it's funny how because I do that, right? I channel my Nana.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So would you make pastry with her?
I did, right? Since I was little, right? I
Yeah.
remember some of my first memories are with her.
Totally. And I remember her hands, which were so, she passed away at 87, and her hands were so, gnarled and weathered, and she had made so many pies. And so I think of her every time I do this with my butter. So you could use a pastry blender, you could use a fork, you could use a whisk, but I like using my fingers.
This is what I love about you. Just get in there.
You just need to do that. You need to get in there with your fingers. And so what she would do.
This is the love.
This is the love. And, I have a 15-year-old son, but baking together, cooking together, being in the kitchen together, it's a great way to spend, screen-free time with your kids and your family and just talk. You sort of have something else going on. You're not sitting across the table from each other. How was your day? Yeah. He won't necessarily answer that. But if we're cooking,
grunt, right? Yeah.
it allows conversation to happen. So what my grandma did was she would run her hands through the flour mixture and find the bigger pieces of fat, bigger pieces of butter, and rub them through between her thumb and her finger, like snapping her fingers, and make these sort of flaky layers. And so that's what I'm doing, just sort of running my fingers through there. And you want a range of sizes of bits of fat in there. You want some of it to be completely blended in, and some bigger pieces. A lot of recipes say no bigger than the size of a pea.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah, and I usually say like a blueberry, because I like some bigger
Okay, well, I had some killer big blueberries today.
Right, so like even a big blueberry. And if it's soft, it can be bigger because it's going to be worked out when we add the water. Okay, so water. I just add water, I don't add vinegar. The idea behind adding vinegar is that it relaxes the gluten. And when you want a really tender pastry, you don't want to overwork the gluten. So once the water comes into contact with the flour, this is a 1/4 cup of water, cold so that you don't melt the butter. You want to be really gentle because mixing it, kneading it, that's why you need bread dough and pizza dough is to develop the gluten, but you don't want to develop the gluten in your pastry
you want that just
or your
melting your
scones.
mouth flakes, right?
Exactly. So you want to be super gentle. And this is why often people put like a shot of vodka in with their water. Have you heard this?
No.
So the idea, it was a big trend a few years ago. And I think people just wanted to have cocktails in the kitchen while they were baking. But the idea was that you could add more liquid and it would be easier to handle, but the alcohol would cook off in the oven, which is actually a myth. It doesn't all actually cook off in the oven. So whatever recipe you're following, you want to add the minimum suggested quantity of water first, because you can always add more, but you can't, obviously take away. But as you're mixing with your spoon or your wooden spoon or your spatula, it's going to look really dry. And most people instinctively want to add more water, right? It looks like it's too dry, I'm going to add more water. You won't know until you get in there with your hands and start to sort of pull the dough together, feel it, and it's always wetter than you think it is. So I'm just going to sort of gather it up with my hands. I don't need it to be perfectly homogeneous. I think a lot of people are looking for that sort of sugar cookie dough smoothness, that perfect pâté brisé. And mine is always shaggy. It's a little bit swirly. You can see the bits of butter in there. So once I can feel that it's holding together, I'm going to turn it out. I'm not worried about messing up my countertop because I'm going to roll this on the countertop anyway.
That's the nice thing about this kind of countertop.
I intentionally got all that flour off. I'm going to use this whole island to make one batch of butter tarts. So you can turn it out onto your countertop, and if it feels good and it's coming together and there's little sort of dry bits in the bottom of the bowl, just let them go. Just don't worry about getting them all in. And I like to sort of pull it together into a disc and then let it rest. And that will let the gluten kind of relax. So you can see it's kind of cracked, it's kind of swirly. And when I teach classes, people get worried about that. And they say, oh, my dough is cracked, it's not right, it's not going to work. That's the flakiness in there.
And how long do you let it sit?
So I'm going to let it rest. Ideally at home I would let it rest for about 20 minutes, but it's not essential.
Not do or die that
If you want to chill it, you can, but often, if it gets really cold in the fridge, you need to let it sit on the countertop to warm up a bit so you can roll it out. Okay, so I've got one batch that I already made. And I'm going to roll it out. Actually, you know what? Could you hand me that parchment, that piece of parchment on the tray? I'm going to do the galette first. Oh, thank you. When I do a galette, I like to roll the pastry
that is
right.
the coolest rolling pin I've ever seen.
It's made in Canmore. It's
Really?
It's burnt. I can't remember what kind of wood, but
I
yeah.
love it. Where did you get it? Tin box?
It was a gift. Where? Which?
The tin box.
The
I think
tin
most
box.
people know the
Oh,
tin
I
box.
do know the tin box.
Yeah.
My friend has chocolates. She has Jacqueline Jasek. She has
Yes.
amazing chocolates there. Okay, it's super warm in here, so I need a little bit more flour. But the great thing about a galette, you don't need a pie plate. All you need is a baking sheet. Oh, I have a garbage right in front of me. Oh, this is the best kitchen.
Love it.
And
it's
so
available for people to rent, to do these sorts of things.
And
right?
is it again? Is it? Or are you
We're
doing
just,
events again?
so we're starting to take a list and getting our heads around, and a bit of it, right? Showcasing you here today is a bit of that message. So if you're interested, we want to hear from you.
We had a kitchen party here before COVID, and it was fantastic. We just had people in here cooking together. We made soup and we made biscuits. And, you know, it's one of those things we all have to eat.
Yeah.
And
well, it brings community together. I mean,
It
I think, and
does.
also, right, always the best parties are in the kitchen.
the best parties in the kitchen, and you learn so much from being in the kitchen with people.
Yeah.
You know, and cooking together is just as social as eating together. And you know, we hear so much in terms of marketing from the food industry that, you know, you don't have time to cook, you need to hit the drive-thru, get these convenience foods, but spending time in the kitchen, you know, that's how people learn how to cook, that's how people connect. And then again, around the table. Could you hand me the sheet, please?
Yes, I may.
Thank
You're
you.
Vanna. Well,
So-
and I think this is important, right, as we talk about girls, but also boys. I love that your son, actually, right?
Son, yeah.
Gets involved.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what your son would say about Day of the Girl. Would he wonder what Day of the Boy was? And you know,
Would
how
he wonder?
Should there be a Day of the Boy, or why is there a Day of the Girl?
I think he would understand. He, you know, he's come to a lot of rallies with me, and he understands very well. So yeah, I mean, I grew up with two sisters. I grew up in a household of girls, and now my sisters and I have mostly boys, and so it's, you know, it's. But yeah, I think he would be totally behind it for sure.
And you're doing the skin and all.
Skin and all, because you know you eat
the nutrients, huh?
You eat the skin of an apple when you eat an apple. So I just think one last step: slice the apples. You know, about 1/4 of an inch thick, and I'm going to toss them with a little bit of sugar. And a free-form tart is just the easiest way to get a pie in the oven quickly. You don't have to worry about crimping it. You don't have to worry about being perfect. You just sort of toss it in, and it cooks more quickly than a full pie too.
Well, and when you're doing it quickly like this, then too, you know, probably don't even have to worry about it going brown either, do you?
No, because we're going to put it right in the oven.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any questions yet? Are people actually cooking?
Yeah,
I'm
what's
so
happening
curious
out
to
there?
see
Do we
what's
know?
happening out in the internet world. No,
We got some people on it.
I
Nothing
know
yet.
a lot of people are not able to get on to the internet, so that's too bad. Okay, so that was a large apple. I'm going to do about 1.5, maybe 2 apples, because the apples will shrink
That's right.
as they cook. But you can combine, you know, rhubarb and apples, pears,
Nice.
plums, you know, any stone fruit, any berries. They all kind of go well together. Anything that goes well in a pie pairs well with each other in a pie.
Well, there's so many choices right now, right? Time of harvest, right? Thanksgiving weekend.
Exactly. It's Thanksgiving weekend.
I know.
We actually did ours last weekend when it was nice out and we could sit in my sister's backyard.
Lovely.
Yeah, it was great. Okay, so I'm just going to slice this quickly right into the bowl. I didn't even get a cutting board dirty. And a little bit of brown sugar, if you want to add cinnamon or ginger or pumpkin pie spice. I'm going to add a little bit of flour too. Just a spoonful, just to take care of any juices that might happen. So you want to toss and coat, but you can see that I'm not being super precise about my measurements. You know, you want about a quarter cup of brown sugar, but you can use less if you, you know, have sweet apples or you like a tart pie. A couple tablespoons is fine. Okay.
Rustic home cooking.
Rustic. Whoever first applied the term rustic to food is my personal hero. So a galette is the epitome of rustic. You pile on your fruit, if there's any sugar and flour left in the bottom of the bowl, you can kind of shake it over top, and then you just fold the edges over. And if it's really warm, the pastry will be soft, and that's okay. You can even do this with puff pastry. Frozen puff pastry, thawed out, and puff pastry is so satisfying because no one expects you to make it from scratch. And it looks great no matter how much you think you mess it up going into the oven. Okay, so there we go. That's our galette. If you want to brush it with a little bit of cream or a little bit of beaten egg, you can, and that will make it glossy. So
and cream will do the same thing as the egg?
Yes, cream will make it a little bit like golden.
Right.
And an egg will make it golden and glossy.
Well, that's a great tip because I've got certainly people in my family allergic to kind of egg. Seems to be fine if it's baked, but I have to be careful.
Oh,
right,
yeah, and cream is just fine. Okay, now we're gonna make our butter tarts. So this had a little bit of time to hang out and rest. Let me grab some more flour. So the key when you're rolling out your pastry is to make sure that you keep it moving around the countertop so that it's not sticking. And if it gets sticky on the top, you can flour your rolling pin, you can flour your pastry, but just make sure you keep it moving. And I generally start in the middle and roll out. See how it's all flaky, and people say, oh, it's dry, but it's not. It's just flaky. It's flaky before it even makes it in the oven. So you want it about 1/4 inch thick. And I'm gonna bake these in a muffin tin. My grandma's old muffin tin, of course. And you can use a cutter, a cookie cutter, or a glass.
Okay, so that's what you're going to do?
To cut rounds. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Where's my glass?
There it is.
Thank you. Okay, so these just need to be an even thickness. We'll press them into the bottom.
And you've done nothing to that tin.
I've done nothing to the tin. Now you could spray it, you could butter it. There's enough fat in the pastry that it won't stick. The only part that could stick is the goo when it swells up, because the egg will make it rise, and then it'll fall back down. But if you take them out while they're warm, you shouldn't have a problem. So, your grandmother's butter tarts. Raisins or no raisins?
There was always raisins.
Always raisins.
And sometimes she would use currants.
Currants is, so the original recipe, and butter tarts are a Canadian thing. The original recipe called for currants.
Yeah.
The original Barrie, Ontario, circa 1903, called for currants, which, if you're ever in a debate, if you're debating this at Thanksgiving, around the table, currants are actually tiny raisins. They're Corinthian raisins. They're not the currants, the fruit. So, technically,
they are raisins.
If you are pro-raisin, there's your argument. People can't debate that. The original butter tart contained raisins.
We have a funny story in my family, because my mom also loves mincemeat tarts, which I don't like. And she had come up for Christmas one year and brought these mincemeat tarts, and she makes the most amazing butter tarts. And I was so offended.
Oh, you're offended that they weren't butter tarts?
Well, right, where were the butter tarts?
Oh, and they're similar. I guess they're not similar enough.
No.
You could put mincemeat in your butter tart filling.
I suppose you could.
You totally could.
Yeah.
You could. So yeah, I mean, make them deeper if you like, or shallower. My glass just happens to be this circumference. So if you want to make them deeper, you can. The filling, I'm going to grab another bowl. The filling is just brown sugar, butter, syrup. It's just like sugar and sugar, and some more sugar, and then add some sugar, and you have butter tart filling. So 1/2 cup of brown sugar. This is golden brown sugar, and you could use darker brown sugar. The only difference is the amount of molasses in the sugar. So darker brown sugar will have a more molasses flavor. Break up the chunks in there. Oh, I forgot about my rhubarb jam. Sometimes I put that on the bottom of a galette before I put my apples on. And I did this once over the summer because my friend Ashley, who owns Worthy Jams here in Calgary, she gave me some vanilla rhubarb jam, and I just had it, and so I spread some in the bottom. It was really good.
I bet.
So you could do that. A little bit of vanilla. So this is what my grandmother used to do.
Just splash? Oh. I love it.
This is my vanilla now. And she always smelled so good.
Oh, well, I love vanilla.
An egg. Yeah, everyone loves vanilla, you know?
Maybe that's the association. Oh my God, that's so fun.
Right? Smell like baking. You just take a little bit of cinnamon and shake it on there too. It'll stick to the vanilla. You'll smell fantastic. Okay, so brown sugar, about equal parts brown sugar and corn syrup, or I like using Rogers Golden syrup, which is made in Alberta. It's cane syrup.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Cane sugar, yeah.
You're just a wealth
versus
of information.
Corn. I'm like the Cliff Clavin of food.
Love it.
Very proud. And a little bit of butter, of course. If you want to melt it, you can. If you want to grate it, actually I'm going to grate it, which makes it easier to disperse, especially when it's soft like this. So my grandmother's recipe says butter the size of an egg, which was a really popular sort of unit of measure back then. And then she's got a couple versions written in cookbooks and on recipe cards. And one says, dump in a lump of butter. And the other one says butter the size of an egg. So whatever you think that means to you, I'm getting butter all over, just, you don't have to measure it really precisely is the point.
Well, and I love that they're called butter tarts and they're mostly sugar.
And they're mostly sugar, yes. Exactly. Well, it's like, you know, butter chicken doesn't really have butter in it. It's got lots of cream, but yeah, butter makes everything better. And I put a little pinch of salt, a little bit, just a little bit, you know, just salt makes everything taste more like itself. You know, it balances sweet things, but, you know, it won't necessarily make things taste salty. It just makes tomatoes taste more like tomatoes, and butter tarts taste more like butter tarts. Yeah. Okay, so what I like to do is put the raisins in the bottom so that if there are any raisin haters, you can just leave them out, you know, and they're not gonna get upset. Or pecans. Pecans are not traditional for butter tarts, but they are delicious. Makes it like a little pecan.
Well,
you could even do
another
both.
food group.
Exactly.
Get some protein.
Some protein, some healthy fats in there, right? It's practically health food.
It can be a meal.
It often is a meal for me. Yep, it can be a meal. Okay, so the filling, and you can double this if you're making a lot of tarts. This will be enough for 12. You want to fill it almost full. It's going to puff up because of the egg in there and overflow a bit. And it's funny, my next door neighbor, his mom was in town and she made butter tarts last summer. And she was apologizing for all the goo around the edge. She was like, oh, you know, I tried to eat those myself. They're so good. And that's how I picture the best butter tarts have the gooey edge.
They need to overflow.
They need to overflow.
Their goodness.
That's where the good, you know, crispy bits and chewy bits are. So I always overfill my tarts. But I do not worry about it because I don't mind the overflow.
I love that we're channeling our grandmothers today, because I think it's so important too, just with the topic and this multi-generational.
It's so important.
And how we sort of honor those that have come before us and the influence, and those of us who've been so fortunate to know our grandparents and our grandmothers. I know that's not for everyone, but also we also have, you know, how do we also embrace a lot of our elderly? Yeah. In sort of, I have a dream of really having programming as well, where we bring our elders and our kids together,
that would be amazing.
right? And you know, and even as we start to plan, you know, mixed living and neighborhoods, and so because there's such a richness that comes.
Yeah, and from those personal connections.
Yeah.
And you know, I have a niece who's 5, a grandniece actually. I have a niece who's 22 and a grandniece.
Yeah, I had one born this week.
Oh, did you? Congratulations!
I know. I call myself a grantie. It's awesome.
A grantie. Oh, I'm stealing that.
Do that.
I'm stealing that.
Absolutely must steal it.
And you know, the great thing about food and traditions is that we always have the power to create those traditions ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, and I think back to making pastry with my grandmother. She probably didn't think it was a significant thing at the time, but I want my niece to have those memories of cooking with me. You know.
Yeah.
I want them to know that when they come to my house, I might make donuts or, you know, and it's not that complex, but those are the things that really stick with you. And they sort of nurture this love of food that I think is such an important thing. It's such an important life skill to be able to feed yourself, but to be able to feed other people, I just got goosebumpy, like and that's something that I've always, since I was a kid.
And I wonder, that's what motivates you, right? Because how did you get into this, and what was your inspiration? So
my mom tells this story of when I was 3, and I asked when I could cook for myself. And she said, when you can read a recipe by yourself, then you could cook for yourself. So I went off with a stack of cookbooks and learned how to read, and came back and said, Mom, what's a tubaspa? She goes, a what? A tubaspa. She goes, use it in a sentence. Add 2 tablespoons of sugar.
I love it.
Because I had read the recipe.
Yes. Well, you had. You sounded it out.
For those who don't quite
your consonants.
Yeah. And so that has always been my thing. But I figured out early on that, you know, cooking for people, it's a way I show affection. It's a way I show support. It makes people happy. And it's something that everyone can do, you know. It's simple. It's the act of cooking for somebody. And, you know, often as a food writer, people say, oh, I could never invite you over for dinner. But that's not the point.
Well,
it's not a
look at what I'm learning from you, right? And just this conversation.
Exactly.
And it's sensory.
Exactly. And you learn so much from people by, you know, going into their kitchens. And so I have so many friends from so many different backgrounds who invite me over to sit in their, you know, mom's kitchen and watch her make, you know, coriander chutney. I've never been able to replicate it. Can you come and sit in her kitchen and help me figure out how to make it? And I invite myself over often if I want to, you know. I need to know how to make roti or dosas. Like, I would just love to learn from these home cooks who have been doing it for generations, how to make their family's, you know, traditional meals. And so, you know, you learn a lot by not only sharing meals with people, but sharing the kitchen, you know, and the ingredients and the, you know, food is just such a personal thing.
And then they welcome you into their folklore.
Yep.
Right, which I think is so amazing, right?
Yeah.
And those traditions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And it is something we kind of share common, right? It's like, when you think of
we all eat
different cultures, right? And different versions of pastries. And what is the version of flatbread?
Oh, around the world. There are dumplings around the world. There's flatbreads around the world. There are, you know, all these dishes that are so similar in countries around the world. And it really is, you know, the great connector. So you notice I have some scraps and some extra.
Yeah.
It's because this is not too big. So if you made deeper ones, you can make deeper ones.
Voila.
So these are going to go into the oven and bake for about 20 minutes. And then we're going to have pie and
butter tarts.
I don't know what you guys are going to eat, but I'm going to have pie and butter tarts.
We've got some drooling people over here. There's a wonderful crew working with us today, right? And just
Fantastic.
Butter tarts for the crew.
For the
I love
best.
it.
Yes.
Well, and you've got a book too.
I do.
Right?
Yes. I have a.
Which highly recommend.
Well.
Tell us the story.
A subject close to my heart. So this is actually my 11th cookbook, and I self-published. I went back to self-publishing after working with a bunch of publishers over 20 years, and you know, this is sort of a pushback against this whole notion of clean eating, which feels a lot like food shaming to me, you know. And I grew up not a socially acceptable weight, you know, and I was ridiculed for it, and it's just always been a big issue for me.
Yeah.
And it was a huge struggle for me as a child, huge. And so, you know, this trend toward clean eating, which suggests that some foods are virtuous and some aren't, but it really suggests that the person eating them is virtuous or not. And we're all familiar with, you know, guilty pleasures and, you know, oh, I shouldn't eat that, I'm being so bad, and it's, you know, it's sinful. All those ideas of guilt and sinning and cheating. You know, and that's something that I really hope that young people are recognizing and pushing back away
Yeah.
from, you know, especially our young girls.
Exactly, right? We think about, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing eating disorders on the rise again, right?
Yeah.
And in sort of in response to all this anxiety.
Yeah.
I think it'll come up in our conversation
Yeah. Yeah.
tonight. But it is about enjoyment, food, right?
Yeah.
This
and
is
exactly, not
and
feeling badly about
not
ourselves
feeling,
for
no, soulful foods, right?
Well-
I have an amazing nutritionist that's helped me sort of figure that, because like I've always struggled with my weight,
Yeah.
Julie. And and shame kind of comes to the place. So I feel it, but it's a question of what's the relationship and allowing yourself to enjoy.
it. Exactly.
And it's all shapes and sizes.
And not beating yourself up for
And
it.
how do we embrace that?
Exactly. This is the way
this
it's
is
built.
this is what it is.
Right? Yep. And I, you know, I'm really heartened by the messages that I'm seeing in, you know, ads for clothing and, like, you know, women of real sizes in ads these days, which I never saw when I was young. So, you know.
Well, and when we see it, then it becomes okay.
Yeah.
I think, right? It's so important.
Yeah.
And I think that's a role too, we as women as leaders
Yes.
and mentors and sponsors,
And
right? Of
example
our young
centers.
girls, right? Really
Right.
important to start to show. It's okay.
Exactly. How we you know, approach our meal times and how we approach our relationship with food. Kids are really, they absorb all these things. And I remember years ago, a young child said to me, "You should be skinnier." And I was like, why do you say that? And they said, well, just girls like themselves better when they're skinny. And this was a kindergartner
Gosh.
who had that impression
Breaks my
already,
heart.
you know. So
Yeah.
so I think it's so important that we just lead by example and you know, and dirty food. Look at what we did here today, you know.
Love it.
It's
I'm salivating at
It's
it.
part of the enjoyment. It's not just taste,
Yeah.
it's smell and it's sight and it's touch, right? So that, like, drippy taco or the gooey butter tart.
But that's where memories are born. Because we're activating all the senses and we're just in the moment enjoying.
And we're not getting that if we're feeling badly about the calories or the I shouldn't eat in it.
No, and
Yes.
counting and all of that.
Okay, so we're going to bake for 20 minutes. We're baking the tarts for 20 minutes. The galette will take about 45 minutes to bake, depending on how thick your apples are and how, you know, how big. And ovens are so all over the place too.
Yeah.
Ovens are not as consistent as we think.
And have you figured these
So
out
about
yet?
40. It's been about 6 months since I've used
Okay,
these ovens, but
yeah.
I seem to recall that they were pretty good ovens. So once you smell something baking, it's a pretty good indication that it's close to being done.
Well, why don't you go have a seat, get
Okay.
a drink,
Okay.
maybe some more M&Ms.
Some more M&Ms.
That was supper today for poor
was.
Julie as we were getting things rolling.
Okay.
And we're going to transition and actually just want to make sure that we're separated appropriately.
gonna
I'll
put my
take my
mask
mask
on.
off. Thank you. We've got actually some new people joining us and hope you enjoyed that. That was just really special. Thank you, Julie. And
Thank you.
thank you for having me kind of lean over and peer over your shoulder.
Of course. That's what kitchen cooking is all about.
But I'm excited to transition to the next part of our program. And you may have seen on our website when we were advertising this event, and this is about Day of the Girl. And we are incredibly proud to showcase the work of an amazing agency actually based in Canmore, thinking of that rolling pin. Many of you know my dear friend Becky Scott, former Olympian, but she has started an organization a couple of years ago called Spirit North. And she and her team, amazing group of people, are working with Indigenous youth and bringing sport and play that actually helps to build the confidence and actually helps them achieve things normally they didn't think would be possible for them. And Becky just shares with immense joy to show how, when you can change the frame and how an individual, and particularly how a young girl, a young Indigenous girl, sees herself, the magic that happens. And I am thrilled to introduce to you, we've got a video that we're going to play, and you're going to hear from Mackenzie, Maddie, and Sienna, and their coach, Rachel, about what it means for them to be on this ski team and what they think about Day of the Girl. Over to the video.
What I love about my sport is probably how fun it is to get out there and learn how to do new things like tricks and stuff with it. I'm Sienna and I'm 12 years old. I'm from Bear Clan and my nation is Sekidane. My favorite activity in sports are skiing, mountain biking, and volleyball and soccer. I was 9 when I first started skiing. Yeah, I loved it. I overcome the challenges of
Yeah, for sure.
probably having courage from our coaches and have hope in myself. When things are difficult, I breathe and take deep breaths and tell myself it's okay. Like I can do this and probably just have fun. I've learned that I'm fast and long distance.
So have you been watching or have you seen anything?
You can always do this, never give up, and you.
Why don't you sit next to Jen?
I was 9 years old when I started skiing. My name is Mackenzie. I'm 12 years old. I'm from the Frog Clan, and I'm from Skintai Nation. My favorite activities and sports are skiing, mountain biking, soccer, basketball, volleyball.
Always have a mask on.
My favorite sport is skiing because it's fun being on the snow, and skate skiing used to be difficult for me, but then I started getting used to it because I didn't know how to skate ski. My best memory from my last ski race
something in relation to
was trying
experiences.
a trail that's zigzagging and just going back straight, and then going down a hill and going up a hill, and then seeing the people cheering you on. I like best most about my coach is she's encouraging and she's fun and she likes to do fun things with us.
Friend.
And she has a good style.
I do. Maybe I need her next
My
to
coach
me.
is important to me because she's always there when I need her. I'm Madison and I'm 13 years old.
Want us to get up or
I'm from Frog Clan
move it to where you want it
and
to go?
Skintai Nation. My favorite activities and sports are soccer, basketball, and skiing and mountain biking. I was
between.
Oh, there you go. You're gonna go.
11 when I started skiing. My favorite sport is soccer. I like being goalie. I actually tried skate skiing on how I skate. From skiing, I have learned that I have more confidence. I raced 4 races at the Winter Games. How it really hurt, I just thought on how proud my mom would be.
When I was a kid, I played sports. I was really lucky to have amazing coaches that changed my life. And I have always wanted to do the same. I've always wanted to give back. My name is Rochelle Van Zanten, and I am the community outreach leader for Spirit North in Burns Lake, British Columbia. Coach kids and these 3 wonderful human beings back here. Not the chicken. I own the chicken, but I don't coach the chicken. We were fortunate enough to become coaches for Morris Williams Elementary and for a lot of children within the Indigenous communities here. So before that, I was rocking the globe as a musician, and it was so nice to come home and be a part of this grassroots program. And now I get to spend a lot of time with these hooligans. Hey, everybody wave.
Well, hello everybody. We have a new scenery and we've gotten ourselves settled, and I've been very conscious of these times, making sure we're 6 feet apart, but we want to make sure that you can actually hear us have this conversation. And hope you enjoyed that video, and thank you again to Becky Scott, her team at Spirit North, and especially calling out Maddie, Mackenzie, and Sienna, and Coach Rachel. So just amazing work that you're doing. This is so much about community and us coming together and elevating this amazing work. And also, how do we bring this, ensure this work is also happening rurally, in more rural areas as well. So critical. So again, that we're not leaving any child or girl behind.
Right.
So But I am delighted to have with me, and thank you too for being so patient with all of us as we deal with our technology issues. But the show must go on, and we're kind of rolling with it. But I have next to me Lana Bentley, YW's own Lana Bentley.
Hi.
So thrilled, and you're going to hear just a bit more about her shortly. And then we also have Dr. Rochelle Papurni, and you've become such a good friend to us, Dr. Rochelle. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And our goal here is to have a pretty amazing conversation about what we're seeing going on based on the experiences in your own practices, the work that we do here at YW. But I want to again just really acknowledge our sponsors for allowing us to be on this journey with us. I don't think they expected to be this rocky either, but we're just kind of rolling with it because that's what we're all having to do. But thanks again to our presenting sponsor, who is BrokerLink Insurance. We have our gold sponsor, who is TD Bank. We've got Royal LePage Benchmark and NMAX. Thank you so much for your visible leadership in supporting this incredibly important event and day in honor of Day of the Girl, and as I like to add, and those who identify as girls. Because this is about gender inclusivity, and that's actually what YW is all about. But we're going to hear first from our presenting sponsor. And so over to Chantal at BrokerLink.
My name is Chantal Doan, a personal lines manager at BrokerLink. BrokerLink is an insurance brokerage with over 140 branches across Canada. Insurance isn't just about premiums and deductibles, it's about relationships. At BrokerLink, we pride ourselves on the connections that we build within the community. That's why we're so thrilled
like
to
we're
sponsor the YW Calgary Day of the Girl virtual event. Young women are at greater risk for mental health challenges as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's important to talk about the issues affecting both girls and women around the world. I'm happy to introduce guest speaker, Dr. Rochelle Papurni. Dr. Papurni has been a psychologist for 20 years and is an expert in the field of attachment, interpersonal neurobiology, and developmental psychology. She has taught at MRU and U of C and spent the past decade in therapeutic practice, specializing in working with individuals with anxiety-based issues. Dr. Papurni now has her own practice, offering both virtual and in-person therapy. And she does consulting for business and educational presentations. She is committed to making a positive impact on mental health in our communities, and I am happy to welcome her tonight. Thank you.
And thank you, BrokerLink, for introducing our amazing guest, Dr. Rochelle Papurni. And now to introduce, officially, Miss Lana Bentley, over to TD Bank.
My name is Michelle Moberez, and I'm the District Vice President of Calgary Central for TD Canada Trust. TD is thrilled to be part of this event this evening. While we would all rather be together in person, we are so glad that YW created this virtual event so we can be together while safely being apart. We know that this year has been extremely challenging for so many, but we've also recognized that women have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, with greater job losses and increased family commitments that have led to some economists calling this a she-cession. TD is committed to propelling the success of women and know that the health and wellness of women is essential for the resilience of the entire community. So with that in mind, I'm very happy to introduce our next guest speaker for the evening, Lana Bentley. Lana is a registered social worker with a bachelor's and master's degree in social work and the Director of Program Strategy at YW Calgary. Prior to joining YW, Lana managed a psychiatric inpatient unit and psychiatric emergency room for children and youth at the Alberta Children's Hospital. For more than 10 years, she's been teaching at Mount Royal University, and this fall she began teaching at the University of Calgary. Tonight, she will share with us her passion for effecting change in human services sectors and the community as a whole. Please join me in welcoming Lana, and thank you so much.
Thank you, TD Bank, for being along with this ride with us, and again, also acknowledging our sponsors, the other two, Royal LePage Benchmark, and NMAX. So Lana and Dr. Rochelle, thrilled to have you both here. And I think as we had talked about it, curious why you agreed to join us this evening, right? Which is going to be a very monumental evening as we fight with technology, as I've said earlier. For those of us maybe who are just joining in, all of our internet is down, which apparently across the country, with a particular service provider. And that's crazy, right? But I guess it's almost symptomatic of how we're all being impacted this year by these weird, strange, unexpected things. But would love to hear. And maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Rochelle.
Sure. Well, my area of focus has been young women and adolescent girls. And so, you know, my belief and inspiration really comes from this group. And this is the focus tonight. And the YW and the work and the connection and the community is really just exactly what's needed, especially right now, because we're all being impacted, mind you, in different ways, but we're all being impacted nonetheless. So the timing is right for this inaugural event.
No, thank you for that. And Lana, other than perhaps being voluntold to do this, but it's not so, I know.
Yeah, like what an interesting year. I don't think anybody could have predicted that 2020 would have gone in this direction. And I know when we met to talk about this event, I was kind of at a loss for words, but I think I might find them tonight. I just think about what an event like this would have meant to me when I was a girl many years ago. And I just think that she could be watching tonight. And by she, I mean a woman who's going to have a major scientific advancement or become a really amazing world leader or just take our culture in so many different directions and solving problems that are plaguing us right now. So I'm just happy to be here and lend my voice and just connect with all the young women out there who I think are poised and ready to make a difference. So I'm happy to be here to join that conversation. And I got to chat with Dr. Rochelle in the green room, and she's awesome. So also meeting cool people. Yeah.
Well, and just this sense, right, of bringing people and this notion too, I think, of having this visible conversation, this time, this place. We've talked about, right, strong women make strong girls. And so much also, how do we all kind of step up? I know, and I've had a little project over the last couple of years. A bit of it, actually, quite frankly, was watching my elderly my mother-in-law, actually, and see how her world was getting so very small, which I think often happens too when we age. And I realized, learning from her experience, is I went on a campaign of getting younger friends. A little bit, but also to get curious, and then also realizing I had an opportunity to step up and to lead and to mentor and kind of benefit, and almost being shaped by what would I have told my younger self.
Yeah.
And so I think in the spirit of what this event is about today is sort of celebrating that, but also knowing that our girls, and particularly those that identify as girls, are struggling and have struggle often and are even struggling more. And so I'd love to understand in each of your practices what you're seeing. And what, and just comment. And let's just kind of have a free-for-all here conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, working with this group of young women, I think of them as the canaries in the coal mine, because they alert us. They're often the first alerters that something isn't right. And we've been seeing an increase in mental health concerns for the past decade or so. But the pandemic has almost seemed like it's, with all the uncertainty it's brought, that last straw. And so we're starting to see, I'm seeing at least more symptoms, anxiety-based symptoms, more eating disorders and panic, and also just a lot of grief, about this and frustration with the losses that have occurred in their lives. It's been hurdles and barriers to get over, for sure.
Well, and the significance, right, of not being able to graduate and what you would imagine that would be, right? Or all these sort of significant, starting your first year of university, right? Or changing schools, not being able to go to schools, or what does that look like?
Losing your sports teams.
Huge.
Yeah, and just having to learn online, that's very frustrating. Either limited in person in classrooms, just the anxiety that comes and the stress that comes into the new way of learning you have to do in person, or having to kind of teach yourself and struggle in isolation learning. Those just aren't the way it's been, and it's not really the way it's supposed to be for learning optimally.
What do you think, Lana, right, in terms of what you're seeing in some of our work? And maybe even talking about, in some sense, right, the families and the children that come through our doors.
Yeah, I think at the best of times, certainly not the case for all, Jan, but for many of the families that we work with, we hear about a sense of social exclusion and social isolation being really problematic. And I think that's not always for dire reasons. Sometimes, we have a language instruction program for newcomers. I mean, imagine what it's like for folks who are still trying to master English right now. You imagine what it's like for the folks who would normally connect with their outreach worker in a coffee shop. You imagine what it's like for parents who had a community built around dropping their kids off to childcare every morning. So I think the social distancing has really highlighted the social connection that we often take for granted. And we really do have more interaction with people than I think we realize. And so I think that's been a bigger loss, and certainly to the degree that I see it in my work. I think teach part-time at the university. Going online was actually really huge. You forget for young people how much of their development is relational. It needs to be witnessed. Mm-hmm. People need to see them, and it's hard to have those milestones in isolation, right?
My son had a break today. He's a second-year university student, and he was like, should I go for a run or should I go to a gym, because just to see people, not that I get close to them, but just to have my eyes on other people and other people to be seen, right? It's important.
Yeah. And so describing what's going on in your own experiences, and I know we've also got a lot of parents, aunts, grandparents watching. How can they help? So what can we as individuals, right? How do we support our girls as they're dealing with this?
Well, I think one of the first things would be sort of that advice you get on an airplane: put on your own mask before helping others. So I think as parents, as individuals, adults in their lives, to really make sure we're well-resourced and replenishing ourselves continuously, so that we have the energy to then see and pay attention and listen to what's happening to the girls in our lives and the boys in our lives. And then once we have that, they're also watching us. So how we're modeling, responding to the adversity, they're always watching and they're learning. So if we're not showing our best or responding our best to this, we're losing our cool or we're melting down, that's what they're paying attention to. So we really want to show and how to handle adversity. And then I think also to mentor them in the way that, I think it's really important to give them hope right now in terms of our mentorship. Show optimism, because, man, we don't know what the future is, but there's going to be a future. And so we've got to, even though we don't know what it's going to look like, we have to be that steadying, stable force to give them the confidence to keep going. Yeah.
Well, I know you would want to build on that, right? Given I'm thinking of some of our mindful
moments,
practices, right? Our mindfullicity. You've been the architect of so much of this programming, Lana.
Yeah.
And how it's shifting outcomes for people.
I mean, I think growing up is a pretty wild time anyways, where you're just on a roller coaster because of your feelings, and it's kind of your job to sort of separate from your parents, right? As you age.
And to test.
Yeah, harder to do when you have to stay in your family bubble. But yeah, I think mindfulness, that's actually been a really strong go-to for me this summer, is just riveting myself to the now and just accepting that, to your point, we don't know what the future is going to look like. And I think reimagining what a good day looks like as well. A good day is not a perfect day where everything's back as it used to be. I think a good day is making the best with what you have and doing, I wouldn't even say normal, like normal's just a cycle on a washing machine, but just being. Do you know what I mean? Just doing what's within your control. And I think tonight was a perfect example of that, right? Like, To be fair, if I'm 12 or 13 and I'm at home, the internet is kind of my lifeline these days. And so I know as adults, we can sort of roll with it. But I get that for young people, it might be really upsetting. And I think for the grown-ups in their lives to just kind of remember and empathize is really key. And that's where the mindfulness, at least with us, comes in, is self-compassion, kindness to self, kindness to others.
Well, and I think a reminder too, we started also just acknowledging the land that we're kind of sitting on right now. And so we've had centuries of people passing through these places and how they've coped. And so we're not the first generation to deal with sort of hardships and other things. And I think what's been really helpful around our table too is talking about the blessings, right? Having the time to spend. We had our 20-year-old living with us this summer, and it was awesome to get to know him on a different level, right? So, and just as a young adult now, right? And also how we talk about with my nieces, right, is what they're struggling with. And you talk about the loss of sports has been significant. I come from a very sporty family, and it's been huge, including the entertainment for my parents. So, but you think about other ways to come together, that this is what we have, and how appropriate that this is also Thanksgiving weekend. And even thinking about, you know, the small socially distanced dinner we are going to have, but counting the blessings. Because I think that notion of hope, Dr. Rochelle, right? So key, and that we as role models and mentors can do. And I want to shift the conversation a little bit, because and I love that we're also including our boys in these conversations. So critical. But we also know the barriers to girls are a bit more significant. It's why this is almost International Day of the Girl. And so I'm curious too, if we could maybe just talk a little bit of the nuance behind some of the barriers, particular, right? If you are a racialized young girl or someone who identifies as a girl, right? Very much opening to the gender inclusivity. So how can we help them? And also, what is the advice you would give to mentors and supports? Because I know one of the key aspects of resiliency is that amazing positive adult in your life. So I know we've got a bunch of those positive adults in people's lives watching. So where would you take that question?
Big question.
You know me, go big or go home.
Yeah, I forget who said it, but she can't be what she can't see. I don't know who's responsible for that, but I think it's a really powerful statement. And, you know, prior to this summer, I had never considered myself as really being a leader or being a mentor, but certainly with all of the civil unrest around Black Lives Matter, et cetera, I'm actually okay now saying that I am a Black woman who's in a leadership position, and how do I make sure that every day when I walk through the door of opportunity, I hold it open for younger women to follow behind me. And I sort of think to all the mentors out there, whether you realize it or not, younger women are watching. And that it makes, you may not even know that what you're doing matters to a young woman. And I would also say to mentors, like, I'm just thinking of my own experience, but my poor dad, I think when I turned 12 or 13, he just sort of deferred to my mother on everything. And I think that unfortunately there's still this gap between men and younger women. But I know that as an adult, when I've done things like when I put my hat in the ring for elected office, my dad set up a Twitter account under a weird name just so he could follow me and keep tabs. And I think the reason that I share that story is because I think there's so many dads who might automatically assume they can't make a difference in a young woman's life. But warm presence and love is warm presence and love. And I just hope dads don't get freaked out and scared as their daughters get older, because it makes a difference. It makes a difference. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful, Jan, but I would just say anybody can be a mentor. Like,
Yes.
but I don't even think you have to do something necessarily like huge or cool. I think you just have to do something with care and concern.
Yeah, show an interest. And
Yeah.
what you described is he really, you mattered. So he got involved and found a way to connect with you on what your interest was. And I think that's really important because I think we've discussed before, like the youth have so much awareness of what's happening politically, what's happening with civil unrest, what's happening with the environment, and they're concerned. And taking some of that interest, that concern, that frustration, that anger, and we can educate ourselves from them because they know in many cases a lot more than we do. Listen to them, learn about it, educate it, and then help them fuel that into some sort of action. Just support them in doing it.
Yeah.
Right? What your dad did with you.
Yeah. And tonight I'm wearing my trans support bracelet, my trans pride bracelet, and that is something that younger people in my life have taught me about. Because I still grew up in, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but a generation where you had very rigid thinking about gender.
Yeah.
And
Very
I know,
binary.
Yeah. And I know now that I don't need to understand the nuance of an issue to support a young person who's going, who needs support from an adult. And so I think my other piece of advice is just be involved, even if you don't have all the right answers. Like, you don't need to be an expert on something to say I support you and I care about you unconditionally.
Better that you're not, because then it's their thing, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
to
good
not
point.
try to be the expert and let them just be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what else is coming up for me is the environment. Like, I remember when An Inconvenient Truth came out with Al Gore, and I totally appreciate that might not resonate for everybody on the video chat, but that wasn't as big of a deal for me because I'll be honest, I thought, well, it's not really going to be an issue for me, but you know what? It is going to be an issue for the young people who are here today. So now it is my issue. And I think that championing the cause of a younger person, like, show up for them. Show up and rally for the things that matter to them, be that environmentalism or Black Lives Matter or gender equality, whatever it is. Just show
Or
up for
all
them.
of it.
Yeah.
Social justice, fairness, treating everybody like a human being, all of it, right?
Yeah.
This matters. It's
Yeah.
good. And the voice, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, right, these are tricky times, right? We're
Yeah.
traversing time, and we actually need all the voices.
Yeah. We
And,
do.
A lot of my work over the years, too, particularly related to girls, and I think those who identify as girls, is confidence.
That's a
Talk
tough
to
one.
me, talk to us about confidence and where in your practice learnings does that come from? And how do we stoke it and grow it in our young people?
I think really listening, giving them, being the audience for them, all the things that we've already discussed right now, and listening with compassion, listening with being curious, because your curiosity makes them feel heard and understood in what they're onto, and so it just encourages more of that. Some of my concerns with this shutdown and clamping things closed is that we might lose some of that because in fear we don't have confidence, right? And when there's threat, we stifle our confidence. Although sometimes during this time, which is incredible, we've seen people step out with courage in spite of that. So you see one end or the other, and I think in those instances where we're not sure if we want to stoke it a little bit more, I think it really is about being curious and really making the ground fertile for that confidence to bloom. So providing that safety, that security around them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, how do you sort of, I'm certainly not a cook, a chef.
And can you smell the aromas that are coming out of these
I actually
ovens?
can.
It's like
very-
amazing.
it's
I
very
hope you're
just-
having the same aromas
Yeah.
at home.
And
if
this
you were able to
this
bake.
is real aroma, not like the magic of television. Like, I can
No.
actually smell it.
I
It's very
know.
distracting, but I just sort of think about failure and just being okay to make mistakes. I don't think you can ever be excellent at something unless you make mistakes along the way and have supportive people around you to help you learn and grow from those mistakes. I think that's essential. And, you know, I know for our counseling department, for example, I remember sitting in on a group and just hearing one of our younger members just really come down really hard on himself. And I said, well, I guess the good news is tomorrow you can begin again. And I think that's kind of it. I think the secret to success is to begin again. And for young people, this is the time in their lives where you get to kind of reinvent and reimagine every day, which can be frustrating, I think, for the adults around them, but that's a part of the journey. And that's how you grow and develop.
Well, and appreciating whose journey it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But I mean, listening to you both, and thank you, right? Because I think it's so grounding as well, because there are never any silver bullets in the complexity of the issues that are going on, but often the approaches are quite similar, right? And it comes down to caring for each other, support, love. But this notion too of experiencing, and we're on the brink, it looks like also, just as numbers are increasing. I think we had one of the highest numbers of COVID cases again today, and you look at what's happening out east again, is again, we're constraining. And this is also a time of youth where kids are experimenting.
Yeah.
Girls in particular, and how do we do that? So any advice you have on how do we create experiences that they're learning, they're failing, gaining confidence.
Growing.
Right? Yeah. What did you do as a parent if you were deathly afraid? I mean, we've had huge empathy with this all going back to school, right? And how do you manage those fears, but knowing that they need to get out in the world?
Yes.
So all of this tension. So what would be the advice to parents and caregivers and supporters?
You know, it's not an easy one. There's no one single, as you said, silver bullet. I just hope that through this time, and I think back to, you know, my father who was born during the Depression and grew up during World War II, and he talks about that as being one of the greatest times to grow up. He wouldn't trade it with anybody else. Yet some people would say those were lost years and lives were on hold because you didn't get the normal developmental experiences and all the things you would have during that time. But, you know, they found a way. And I think that as well, there's going to be going back into, if it does go into more isolation and lockdown, we've developed different ways and different expectations and also creative methods. And some of those silver linings occurred, at least in my household, when we talk about it over those 6 months. Different game nights, different, you know, dinner, cooking nights. There was just a lot of different things that we did that we would have never had that I treasure. So, yeah, we have to look for those, more of those. Yeah.
It's kind of weird to think, a former student of mine who works here, she emailed me about the pandemic. And I said, you know what? One day you're going to tell your kids about living through the pandemic and they're going to be so bored and roll their eyes. And I said, just in the same way that our grandparents had these really formative world experiences and it built character, I said, there's going to come a time when this will be behind you. And you'll talk about, oh, I remember when we had to do this, that, and the other. And it'll seem so unimaginable to the young people you're talking about, but you'll survive and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
It'll become a story and a part of history.
And the folklore, right? And all of that in your families, right?
The pandemic of 20, yeah.
That's a really good point, and you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the reassurance as well.
That's it.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Just that support and love and just reaching out. We have questions that are coming in.
Oh, good.
So, but we're waiting for the ding ding as well, because I'm lying Julie across the kitchen. When do you think we might be able to see that amazing baking?
Oh, I can pull it out anytime. Shall I?
Shall we show? I think that would be awesome.
And Jan, to clarify, all the hard questions are going.
They're going to Dr. Rochelle, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Did we agree to that, or because I think that just happened?
Well, here is the amazing galette.
Shall I bring it around?
Why don't you do that? You've got a mask on, again, being bright sensitive, but we can sort of see and get the camera. Oh my God.
It smells pretty
it really
amazing.
does.
Well, and it was a reminder spending time with Julie, just how therapeutic that was, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, and we were both channeling our grandparents, our grandmothers.
Yeah.
And again, it was incredibly grounding
Yeah.
and soothing.
Yeah.
So again, how do we cook together?
Right. It's the process. That could have come out as a big flop, and it would have been okay.
It's awesome. Right, yeah.
But it
Well,
didn't.
and I never knew that you could grate butter
Right.
into pastry. So
Right.
I've got this whole new thing. Oh my God, this is my favorite things of all time.
Look at these. You got to take them out quickly while they're warm so they don't fuse to the pan. My
Well, and I hope you've
favorite.
had similar successes at home, people. I am salivating here. Oh my God.
I'll put them on a plate.
Excellent.
They smell amazing.
Excellent.
I feel bad that the camera crew can't get the full essence of the smell.
No,
Because
but
they're
they
all
will,
masked
'cause
up.
we
They're,
have promised
they're all
them. They
working
get
very
first
hard.
dibs.
Yeah.
They are, wow.
You should
And
make
I
sure
want
they
to
get one
shout
first.
out to the fellows that are here working with us because
Yeah.
they have done cartwheels
It's
in
seen
the
a
circumstances just to make this all
Panic.
possible, right? Talk about agility in motion.
Yeah.
So thank you all for that. So we're going to take some questions. And one of the first questions, actually, it goes to you, Lana.
How did this happen?
Sorry, I was specific to you.
Okay, I'm hit me with it.
Yeah. So thinking about your life, so about, I
Yeah.
think part of mentorship as well is sharing our own experiences
Yeah,
and some
for
of our
sure.
own vulnerabilities. To me, that's the ultimate in leadership. What has changed for you in the pandemic?
What's changed for me? Like at work or just in my life?
It doesn't say. So you get to interpret.
What's changed for me? Wow, I don't want to be boring, but I think for me, Black Lives Matter was a really big deal for me this summer. And I think wanting to be involved, but then worrying about like if I go to an event, what's going to happen. And so I think like just feeling conflicted between wanting to be involved in my community, but also thinking about the health restrictions. So I think on a personal level, that came up for me. Like there's never a good time for there to be, unrest and dealing with issues like racism. But that was really, really tough for me actually, was to feel like I was observing and I couldn't totally participate. Because I'm one of those people who does have, I don't want to say pre-existing condition, but I have health concerns. And so that was really, but I think people who are watching at home can probably relate to that, is you just take for granted how much the pandemic impacts just being able to leave your house and kind of do what you want. So I think that changed for me. And I think the other thing, Jan, I'm not a tech person, and having to adapt to all that, like it is just not my scene. And I know if there's any people who work with me watching this, they can validate. I'm not good with computers. I'm not good on computers. So I think having to learn how to manage my body language, my nonverbals, and just getting more tech savvy. I'd never heard of Zoom before. This is my second interaction with Facebook Live. So yeah, I think I really had to get up on my technology, and that was a hard adaptation for me to make.
No,
But I did it.
So well, no, right? We do it, which is again back to that reinforcement. You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
because we learn.
Resiliency. You
Yeah.
adapt, right? You
Right.
make the changes that need to, that you can't control.
So a question for you, Dr. Rochelle. How can seeing a professional help, and at what point should I seek a professional?
It's a great question.
Right. Well, I think I'll start with the second question first. I think that when you start to see your physical or your mental health being compromised, and it's being long-term, so you start feeling maybe panicky or losing interest in certain things, maybe your sleep is being affected, your relationships are being affected, your general health. I think those are all really good markers. And sometimes it's because someone's held up a mirror to you and noticed and said, you know, I'm concerned about you.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's what it takes as well. So all of those things. And, you know, sometimes people say, I don't want to burden my friends or family, but I'm struggling. So that might be the time as well, is to just have that opportunity to have someone to go to be heard, to be seen, and to get what's inside of you out, and to help make sense and get some distance from it and have someone reflect it back is really useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've actually put on the screens resources that people
Excellent.
can actually go to, including your website, including obviously YW and others. So want to make sure that you have those resources. There's an amazing new app that we've been involved with, led by actually Catholic Family Services, YYC Connect.
Yeah.
So again, also connecting people to counseling resources in our community. Yeah. So really proud. We've come together with a number of agencies in town as well. And so part of this is it's okay and reach out.
Oh yeah.
Right? And having and listening to those you love, right?
Yeah.
If they're seeing something, it's not critique, it's not judgment, they're concerned.
Right. And what we resist persists. And so, better to start getting it moving and be able to work through it and past it rather than suppressing.
Good call.
And so would there be behaviors or symptoms that maybe even some specifics that you can advise people who are watching that they should just pay more attention to?
I think emotional regulation, when you're finding yourself getting stuck in panic or rage, you just don't have that calmness, or just shutting down. For some people, it's just that full, I've gone numb, I'm like completely shut down. And so
they're all threat responses, right? When we think of the
they are.
neuroscience.
They are. Fight, flight, and then freeze.
Right?
Yeah. So any of those.
Yeah.
Not feeling yourself.
We've had a saying even here at YW all along through this 7-8 months, right? That we're all affected by this, and in many respects are on the edge of our emotions. And we have a really cool new app called Mindfulicity that we've been releasing in modules. Lana, you've been so instrumental in helping us with that to make it available to everyone and also into workplaces, ultimately to also create more psychological safety. But what we found, particularly in this pandemic, but part of it is understanding your own emotions.
Right.
Yes.
Right? Just they tell you what is so important to you and when things are off. And in many respects, particularly in the workplace, and when also the boundaries between work and home have so blurred.
Yes.
Right? This added awareness and your emotions are telling you something. Right? So paying attention to that. So as you say, right? Because I think particularly for girls and women, it's also not okay to be angry.
Right.
True.
So, right? And so in your experiences, how does anger sometimes manifest?
Well, there's certain cultural display rules, as you say, that within families or in our society that, and as you say for girls, and anger is one of the ones that we really don't support enough of, and it often turns against the self. So if you don't have the opportunity, it might turn into any kind of issues like self-harm or eating disorder in the extreme. So yeah, it'll go somewhere else and usually turn inwards.
I sort of find, like, if I can just name that I'm angry, it just gets less intense. Do you know what I mean? Like, I almost find like stuffing it makes it worse. It's like, don't think about pink elephants.
Yeah.
Like, don't be angry.
Yeah.
Don't get upset. And I find anytime somebody starts a statement by saying, now don't get upset, but I'm like, well, now,
Yeah.
like, dude, you lost me. Like, I am going to be upset, and don't tell me how to feel. But I think just even naming the emotion can just...
Absolutely.
Well, it's powerful. It's one of the techniques that we often, right, we practice here, right? Identify it. And that feeling, because then it actually starts to dissipate.
And it's evidence-based. Name it to tame it. As soon as you can name it, everything, the amygdala starts to calm down. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And get you into your prefrontal cortex, and then you can actually discern.
Yes. Yeah.
That's going to be my next career, whenever that's going to be.
Psychoneurobiology.
I'm fascinated by, right? The neuroscience have it. But it's almost like we're learning with some of the advances in technology, really, how we actually originally have been built.
Yeah.
And we've had cultural practices, particularly in the business world, where we repress emotions. Don't have them, park them at the door.
Right. It got in the way of productivity.
Yeah.
And
I think the lens on gender becomes really important on that, because, women are too emotional.
Right.
Girls are too emotional. And it's like, how do we harness that, right? And shift how you frame it.
Well, it's kind of like, and I don't know if this is still the case, but I think the two biggest burns when I was in school were to tell a guy that he was like acting like a girl, or to make a homophobic jab at somebody. He's crying like a girl, he was running like a girl. And I'm like, what do we run like? Like, do we do it on one leg? Are we hysterical when we run? Like, we just run. And it's an insult. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, being emotional isn't just he was crying, it's he was crying like a girl. And I think in addition to that, teaching girls that they're the equivalent of an insult, I also worry about what that does for boys.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What if he just wants to cry?
Right.
Yeah. And it's okay.
Right.
Totally. It's uncomfortable, but just cry.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
But work through it, and then then start to unpack it. Right? So, anyway, I've got a doozy of a question here. So I'm actually gonna, but I think it's coming back to you, Lana, as well.
Hot potato.
So we've heard, and this is, don't complain. People have it worse.
Oh.
Aren't we allowed to be, allowed to be discomfort? Or allowed to have discomfort without having to compare ourselves to others? It's a pretty layered question. I love it.
It's so interesting just when I think about our work at YW, because a big part of our work is helping people have healthy relationships. And sometimes the barrier to people recognizing that they could be in a healthier relationship is to say, well, it's not like that person hits me, or it's not like it's that bad. And I don't know why you're not allowed to just have your own assessment of what feels good to you. I remember when I started working at YW, there was this really kind man who was, he helped me with my leadership, and he said, you don't honor your instincts, you obey them. And so he said to me, one of the best things you can do for yourself, Lana, is just learn to listen to you. Don't always act on it, but just...
Good piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But listen, so I don't, the comparison part in this where we work, sometimes that can actually prevent people from making decisions that would otherwise be quite helpful for them.
Yeah.
Is there somebody who's got it worse? Probably, but two things can be true at the same time. Somebody can have it worse, and it's still okay for you to have a boundary, or sorry, touching my mic, expectations of how you'd like things to look. That'd be my 2 cents.
Owning your truth.
Yep.
Speaking in the I. Having confidence to speak in the I as opposed to we, us. It's what is my truth. Right? This is what I believe. And the confidence to believe, you know, to say that, express that. Because no one can refute your truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, though.
It is.
I'm
It
super,
is.
yeah, I'm
You
super
handled it very
curious
well.
about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Whoever asked that, that was a really,
Insightful, right? Well, and just how complex this is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No easy answers.
I wish we had them, but I think the message here is, and I think the power of community coming together is that we talk it through and we explore, and this, and you know, how can you create this also in your own circles, and how powerful this is. We have another question that asks, how can I reach out to my 12-year-old without her getting mad? Tough transition age,
Yeah.
particularly for girls, right, as they go
Absolutely.
through puberty.
Yeah, and they will get mad if you poke at them and say, talk to me. And I think that one of the key things is connect before you redirect. So if there's something that you want, you want to
These
connect.
Great sayings.
Connect.
I
Well,
hope
they're
we're writing
catchy.
them down.
And really what they're saying is attune. Meet them where they're at. Going back to your example with your dad. Looking to see where her focus is, where her interest, even a little glimmer, read her body language as she perks up to something or shows the slightest interest. And gently, so measured, you know, join her there. If she's watching a show that she likes or doing something, take an interest. You know, don't take over, but sit next to. And going back to the idea of mirroring. So holding up that mirror and say, it looks like you really like this, right? Or you don't look, you know, watching you walk towards a car, there was a heaviness today. Is everything okay? Doing that rather than just jumping in, interrogating and assuming is a really useful approach so that she won't get mad. Try it.
Great advice. Right. And also the power of the open-ended question,
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
right? Otherwise you
No,
just get the
yes.
grunt.
You're making me feel bad for when I was Yeah, sorry, Mom.
Yeah, or the rolling eyes, right?
Yeah.
So expressive at that age as well. We have a question, Lana. What does your shirt say?
So my shirt says, a woman's place is in council chambers, the legislature, the House of Commons, and Senate.
Love it.
I think tonight, watching on this broadcast, could be the first female mayor of Calgary or the first prime minister. Maybe she'll give us a shout out when she gets there.
Well, and I don't know how many of you watched the vice presidential debate yesterday. Were you talking about it?
We did.
But also talk about the leadership of Kamala Harris and what she represents to young girls, particularly young girls of color. Right? And she was exceptional. Clearly I'm biased, but I thought she was exceptional. So, but it's about show, right?
Yeah.
And, right? It becomes possible. I mean, even thinking too, bringing back Spirit North and some of the work that Becky Scott is doing, right? And with the 3 girls that we heard from today, right? You know, just that they can see, they can be, it becomes possible.
Yeah.
It becomes a possibility, right? That they can dream to be on the Olympic podium, right? Just again, by Becky's even her own example and what she's doing in that work, it becomes possible. And how powerful that is, which is about the hope.
Yeah.
Right? So again, as mentors, how do we do that? We've got questions coming in right, left, and center.
wow.
And I'm going to get heck after this because I didn't even tell people how to give us questions. So it's awesome. Okay. You're both going to want to tackle this one. Tag team. Why are some people more resilient than others?
That's
Okay.
it's a good question. Yeah.
It's a great question. I mean, we could go into innate traits, but I don't think that's what's really most important here right now, because we know that resiliency can be developed. It's numerous qualities that are skills that we can build. So I think the qualities of resilience, if we can think of them in terms of available social supports and being able to reach out and accept help when it's offered, that's one level. I'd say emotional agility is a source of resiliency. So if we can do all these things, to have the courage to face difficult emotions and name them and work through them, use them as signposts towards action, that's makes us resilient. I'd also say on a psychological level or a mental thinking level, if we have that flexibility to adjust and adapt to adversity like we did tonight, that's a level. And then the biological level, like if we can learn to use things like meditation and using sleep and nourishment to really help us replenish ourselves. Those are all things that I think can help us build our resilience.
Yeah, and I think where you start out isn't necessarily where you're going to end. So even if you start out in life, like I'm a real sneakerhead, and part of that is just because when I was a kid, we didn't have that. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like it just wasn't an option. But I think where you start out, it can build character, and the good thing about your history is you can always add to it. So I think to your point, there's so much you can do to influence where you want to be.
And you never do that alone.
No.
Right, which again, right, power of community coming together and the roles that we play, and a bit of the message for this day.
A cheering section.
Yeah.
And you need a little bit of adversity in order to develop resilience and to grow and mature and learn from that. So in small, regulated or supported doses, we can build adversity as well.
I'm going to invite those that are watching, continue to keep your questions coming in, but we're going to finish our kind of formal broadcast with this last question that I'm also going to throw back to the both of you, tag team, because I know you both will have just a unique perspective on it. But how can I help someone who is struggling, who doesn't want to reach out for help?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm going to give, from my former career, I guess I'll give a frustrating therapist answer. It depends. It really does depend. I mean, if we're talking about a young person, I think it looks a little bit different than if an adult were to notice another adult struggling. So I think it depends a little bit. So would you like us to focus on this, Jan, from the perspective of a supportive adult who notices a young person struggling?
Yeah, 'cause I
Okay.
think that grounds us, right? And
Yeah.
what this day is all about.
Sure. Thoughts?
Those are some of the most difficult clients for any therapist when you have, and assuming that you could even get them in the door, but ones that are avoidant and, you know, hard to get through to. What I would say to parents would be, let them know about your concern. Let them know what you're seeing. So again, hold up that mirror to say, you know what, I can't help but notice that, you know, you're not eating, or that you've lost interest in reading, and I know how much you loved it. You know, you've lost that. So just paying attention to things that aren't functioning well and what's concerning you. And then just drop it. If they're not open to it, then say, you know what, I'm going to come back on checking you later, or, you know, and do it, and keep letting them know, because that in and of itself is letting them know that they're being seen.
Yes.
And also paying attention to themselves, that, okay, there is something going on too, so it's validating.
I'm just thinking when you mentioned the piece about concern, so we have a program here called Family Champions, and they do a lot of workshops for parents with kids of all ages, 0 to 17. And there's one workshop that we do on healthy relationships for teens / teen dating violence. And one of the things that the staff coach parents to do is don't make it about enforcement, make it about concern. So there's a big difference between, I don't want you seeing that person because I think they're bad for you, versus I'm really worried. You just haven't seemed like yourself, and I just wanted to let you know I'm here when you need me. I think there's a difference between, I guess, the spirit of how you come across versus the letter of the law. And I know our teams work really hard, particularly with adolescents.
Yeah.
It's their job to experiment and
And push.
And push.
they're doing their job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
concern versus, I think, enforcement is.
Yeah. Well, that's great. These are tough, and I think, I mean, also hearts out to everyone who is struggling right now. And again, we're displaying some resources that you can tap into. We are here for you. We wanted to have this conversation, and so just very much want to thank Lana and Dr. Rochelle just for this amazing conversation and just even having me be a part of it. So thank you. All of our speakers tonight donated their time. So I also want to acknowledge that. Amazing expertise, also including Julie. I don't know where she's gone, but she finally got off her feet. She's been cleaning the kitchen here and doing things, but wanted to thank Julie Van Rosendahl, and just what a bright light she is. And also grounding us, right? And just daily rituals and how powerful that is. And so appreciated her too, sharing just even the kind of conversation she has with her son, right? And it's important, right? What are we teaching our boys? Right? And also creating space for our girls and those who identify as girls. A big shout out again to our event sponsors, our presenting sponsor, BrokerLink Insurance, our gold sponsor, TD Bank, Royal LePage Benchmark, and NMAX. We couldn't do this for you without you is what I meant to say. And thanking so much too, just for all of you who've kind of continued with us tonight. We are going to make this link. We're committed to kind of letting the show roll on. So to everybody who has registered, so you'll have the benefit of this conversation. So, and share it widely and proudly. We at YW are just thrilled to be able to bring community together. Tonight is very much about us owning our why, our YW, right? Young women. And And so it was a dream of ours also to put a stake in the ground around Day of the Girl and say, no, we need to kind of make a point, and also understanding the complexities and the added challenges that our girls and those who identify as girls and are facing in this time. So thank you for joining us. All funds that are raised go to the incredible work and important work that YW Calgary does, particularly in supporting vulnerable women and their families in particular times of crisis. And you can only imagine, given now crisis in a pandemic, the double layering and how complicated this work is. And I also want to make a big shout out for our frontline workers who have been working 24/7, day in and out, in supporting the clients that we have. And it's fatiguing work. And we are so proud and continue to be amazed by what they're able to do and driven by the passion to help, which is also what brought us together today. So thank you everyone tonight. I want to thank our crew. So thank you too for making this possible. So appreciate that. And have a great night, everyone, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And may we all find and pause and reflect truly on the blessings we do have, because that's actually how we're going to get through all of this together. Thanks again for being with us tonight.
Thank you.